This time I'm going to be going through the process of the next iteration on the molds for the throttles and hopefully getting the final or close to final parts back to TCS, the customer. Welcome to another episode. So in this episode, what I'm going to do is bring you up to date as to where we're at with making molds for the model train throttle. Things are not where we wanted them to be. There are some things that did not go well at all. We ran into some of the ugly with working with overseas partners. At least that's what we thought. Turns out to be a little bit more interesting, a little bit more complicated. And as a result, I'm going to have some suggestions for those of you who have customers about customer communication. How is it best to communicate with your customers? Have a good relationship with your customer, that sort of thing. Anyway, we'll get to that later. Let me head to the computer and I'll show you the changes. Here's the list of design changes that I mentioned we were putting together in my last video. And so I'm going to go through them pretty quickly. The first one is fairly straightforward. We discovered that for whatever reason, the display that we were getting had some different tolerances than before. So we could see some of the backlighting if you held the throttle a certain way. Moving the window edges inside a little bit will eliminate the ability to see the backlight. So that'll improve it quite a bit. But of course, this is probably something they'll charge us for. The main thing is what I showed before in the video, which is that the front and the back don't align correctly. And I suspect that's because there's a lot more surface here. So when it shrinks this way, it actually pulls it in to the right. And here I mapped out how much it is. One of the things that they did is they added this little reveal. Let me zoom this in a little bit so you can see this better. So they added this little reveal, which is this third step here. And the purpose of the reveal is to make it less obvious that there are slight differences between the front and the back. By having a little gap between the front and the back, those differences should not be quite so obvious. Now they added the reveal everywhere except for right here. This is actually as they milled it. So we pointed this out to them and said, okay, this is a place where you missed it. TCS wanted to reduce the depth of the reveal. Right now it's about 16 thousandths of an inch. They wanted to make it about half that width. We also discovered that it was possible to pull the lanyard out of the lanyard hole. More on that in a little bit. And so one of the things that we did is decide to add two bosses here. These two bosses will push down on the circuit board, and the circuit board will help keep the lanyard in place. So moving to the thumb wheel support, we have this section here. We need to move this up a little bit. I left it so that it was steel safe, and we decided after checking it that we need to move it up by 7 thousandths of an inch. Because we're moving this up 7 thousandths of an inch, it means that this area here does not have to be as thin as it originally was. With the current thickness, we have a few issues with sink on the back. So that means we can make this about 7 thousandths of an inch thicker to compensate for moving this up. The battery door, we had a few issues with it. One is that there's too much slop all the way around. Again, that's steel safe design. The other thing is you can see that the top does not go down all the way. And I'm not sure why that's the case, but we wanted them to take a look at that as well, because it means that you have to actually provide more force than I would have expected right here, pushing down to engage this latch. The thumb wheel, we decided that there was too much on either side here, and so we decided to make the thumb wheel a little bit wider, and we also decided to add a lip on the thumb wheel to keep it constrained against the two sides of the supports. And then what that means is that we can make this a slight loose fit, so it is possible to move the thumb wheel side to side just a little bit. So it's not applying pressure on the rotary encoder. The idea here is to reduce the chance of putting stress on the encoder and causing that to fail. So this right here will provide the side-to-side constraint. And then the final thing is we wanted to put a cap to create a new part, and the purpose of this new part is to hold the lanyard clip in place. There's a string on the end of the lanyard that goes through this channel here. And it turns out that it was possible to kind of get it caught under the edge of the circuit board and have it lift up the circuit board and pull out. So between the bosses that I showed earlier and this part here, it means that we should constrain it enough so that the lanyard just won't come out at all unless you pull so hard that you break something, but that's going to be really hard to do. Okay, so that's the changes that we sent off to the mold maker. After putting that file together, we talked to the US representative of the mold maker over the phone, and we went through each of the items one at a time, talked about them, and came up with a plan for what we were going to do next. And it was a really good conversation. The representative, for example, made some suggestions, like for the cap for the lanyard. We were going to glue that in. He made a suggestion, though, that they could probably do something to make it so it would be a friction fit or a press fit so that it wouldn't require glue. So that all sounded really good. He said he would have a new file to us. I think it's an ESN file. I'm not sure what that stands for. But it's a PowerPoint where they go through all the different things that need to be changed. And then we need to approve that. So we talked to him on a Monday or Tuesday, and he said he would have that file by Thursday. Later that day, he asked me to, or the next day, he asked me to send the files again. I asked for clarification as to which files because he just said send the CAD files. But I had already sent CAD files for the lanyard cap and for the changes to the thumb wheel, so I wasn't really quite sure what he was asking for. So I sent all the files. And then nothing. We kept asking what was going on. He said he was having email problems. This was a week or two later. And to ask to send the files again. So we sent the files again. And then nothing again. So this went on for, in total, probably about 3 or 4 weeks before we finally got a hold of him. And this is where I have a suggestion for anyone who does this type of business about customer interactions, and you'll see what that suggestion is once I get to the meat of what happened here. So we're wondering, what's going on. We're starting to explore our options. We're thinking, okay, maybe we need to get the mold shipped from China to the US and see if we can have someone finish the mold here. Maybe we have to start over with another company and make a new mold. That wasn't very attractive, but these are all the things we were looking into because we just had no idea what was going on. Finally got a hold of the molding company, and they said, oh, well, what happened is because you didn't get your design perfect the first time, now this means you're at the end of the queue, and you're going to have to wait till they finish all of the other projects before they can get back and make these changes because you didn't do a proper job the first time around. So this was all sounding pretty bad. Finally got a hold of the US rep. He was in China. And so we arranged for a time to call him, and he was at the mold maker at the time. So we called him, and after pushing pretty hard, basically what I said to him, and I said, look, I know things happen. The important thing here, this is the customer suggestion, if you're dealing with customers, the important thing here is to let us know. If it's good news or bad news, it doesn't matter. If something has changed, we need to know, because we need to be able to plan. If we don't have any information, we can't plan. So we understand that bad things happen. Just let us know. After pushing him a few times and saying, look, we really need to know what happened because we want to know whether or not we can trust future deadlines. We want to know whether or not whatever happened could happen again and whether or not we need to plan for that. So after going through this a few times, turns out he was on vacation for 3 weeks in Europe. Okay, that's not a very good reason not to get back to us. So the important thing here is treat your customers well by communicating with them. Communicate frequently, communicate, reply quickly. If something bad happens, let them know. Then they can work it out between you and the customer, but let them know. What we ran into should not happen. It makes it really hard to plan. And we lost a month because of that we hadn't planned on losing. So we did finally have the conversation, and they promised they would send us a file within a few days. I just got the file today, so I'm going to go back to the computer and run you through the changes that we have. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about steel safe or metal safe design, because I've learned a few things about that since the changes that we sent and since the conversations I had with the mold maker. And I've learned that I probably wasn't doing things the right way. Anyway, we'll come to that. So let's head back to the computer. So going back before what I was just describing there, you sent us a file a little bit earlier than the conversation I had with the rep in China. And in this case, they were focused on, let me go back. They were focused on how to better improve the size difference between the front and the back. What they wanted to do is to change the gating arrangement to have better filling and packing of the back in the hopes that it wouldn't shrink as much. So this is a proposal that they're making to change that. They were also looking at other changes, but what was clear from the list of other changes is they didn't address all of the issues we were asking about. So that's when we needed to make the phone call and have the full conversation going over the list again. After that phone call, we got another file from them, and this one had all the things that we looked at. So you can see that it has reducing the size of the hole so we get a better finish, adding the shoulder that I mentioned, and various other things. Now this is where things get interesting, which is look down here. They want to charge us to get the fit just right between this hole here, the D-shaped hole, and the shaft on the encoder. Okay, so let's unpack this a little bit. What we thought we were getting is we thought we were getting the mold maker being responsible for getting the fit just right between the thumb wheel and the encoder, so that it would be not a tight slip, just a slightly loose, so that you wouldn't really feel it, but it could move on the shaft a little bit so that there wouldn't be too much force on the encoder. We thought they were responsible for that, but they're saying we're responsible for that. So why the difference? I thought threads, steel safe or metal safe, if you're not using steel, like if it's aluminum, it would be metal safe, meant that what we needed to do is we needed to leave some extra space so that they could do that work themselves and get it to be just right. Turns out, the way apparently it's supposed to work is we're supposed to give them CAD files that are exactly what we want. In other words, there's no gap at all in between the shaft and what exists in the CAD file. And then it's the responsibility of the mold maker to make things steel safe, to play it safe, in other words, when they make the mold, and then to do iterations on their side to get it just right. And what we need to do in those cases is we need to very clearly call it out. Now, what happened in our case is that we had a discussion on the telephone, and based on that discussion, what I thought they were saying is I needed to account for the mold safe aspect and to leave things a little bit loose, and then the mold maker would adjust it. But it turns out the mold maker is being very literal and saying, hey, we did exactly what you asked for. We did, you didn't call anything else out, and you left a gap. So we made the gap. So if you don't want a gap, you have to pay for changing it so there's no gap. We'll see what happens with that. We're probably going to have a few conversations with them. The sum total is, all of those things add up to about $1,100. I'm not sure where things are going to go with that. But in any event, the thing that I've learned is moving forward, what I need to do is, number one, the CAD file should be exactly what we want without any gaps, without any tolerances for variations. Number two, make it very clear with a call out in writing that we expect this to be something that is mold safe, that the mold maker is responsible for getting the fit that we want. So that's something I'll do next time. There will be a next time because we're going to make another version of the throttle that's smaller. We'll get to that probably in the late winter or early spring. Let's head back to the computer and I'll show you the other changes. Okay, I've talked about this one to death, so we can move on from there. Most of these changes are just to get things to fit better. So we have a gap that goes all the way around, and the idea is to make this gap so it's less, so that the top and the bottom half fit together more precisely and therefore help keep the shape. This I mentioned earlier, they're going to reduce the size of the window. what we ended up doing is for the thumb wheel, instead of increasing the width of the thumb wheel, what they're going to do is they're going to decrease the width of the opening for the thumb wheel. So the end result will be the same in terms of the amount of clearance. For the reveal here, they had missed an area here, and what we're talking about now, by the way, notice how they're charging us $200 to fix what we think is their mistake. We made it clear to them that we thought it was their mistake. They insist because it's not an ArcCAD file, it's our responsibility to pay for it. I pointed out that this reveal is something that they added. It was never in our CAD file, but anyway, we went back and around, and TCS wants to just completely get rid of the reveal, so that'll take care of that whole issue. Here's the boss that I mentioned before, moving things up, as I mentioned before, reducing the thickness, increasing the thickness here, as I mentioned before. And then this is where they did make a change, which is they put some little nubs, I'm not really sure what these are called, around this part here on the cap for the lanyard. And what this will do is to provide a little bit of friction that keeps it in place so it doesn't have to be glued in place. Anyway, so that's a quick look at how they're going to take care of all those things. For this part here, where the top and the bottom half don't fit perfectly, they're going to try some more experiments, and if, as I said, they're going to change the gate. If the gate doesn't work, then what they're going to do is a 3D scan of the actual parts and compare the actual parts to the CAD files to see exactly where the differences are. Because what they can do is once they see exactly where the differences are, then they can modify the mold itself to compensate for the shrinkage that they're getting and hopefully produce a part that is a lot closer to the final design. So where does this leave us? All right. We have the changes they've suggested. We need to get back to them. And we're going to have some conversations with them. I'm guessing it's going to take a few days. After that, it's probably going to take them 2 to 3 weeks to modify the molds, including the iterations, and to make another set of test shots. Now, because they have, for the first time, they have the circuit board and the encoder and the screws and everything else, including a keypad, in their hands. It means they have everything they need to be able to assemble it completely and see if everything, in fact, does fit the way it should and everything has the right feel. So with any luck, the next time they shoot samples, we might actually be able to do a small production run and start being able to assemble throttles and ship them out. What that means is that, let's see, it's the middle of November right now, so we're probably looking at minimum 4 weeks. We're looking at the middle of December for being able to start shipping throttles to customers. That's optimistic. It's a possibility. Is it very likely? Probably not. So we're probably looking at January as a realistic time to be able to ship the throttles. Certainly not what we want, not what we were planning on, not what we promised. We also didn't expect for the representative in the US to go dark for a month. That really set us back quite a bit. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Please subscribe, comment below, and I'll see you next time.